want to call your attention to this May 3rd, 1990 flood, which developed a peak flow measured about 82,300 CFS at Commerce Street. And then, Kelly, if you'll go to the next slide. And these are somewhat complicated, and I hope that I do an adequate job of describing. I'd like to start with the one on the right. This is an actual cross-section of what the floodway looks like at Commerce Street. These are actual survey points. So if you begin up here on the upper left side, you have the top of the levee on the east side. You come down the levee to what we refer to as the river bank, down the channel, up again, over, and then up to the top of the west levee. Now that I've shown, and by the way, you see the scale on the left-hand side, that's the actual elevation above mean sea level. And I want to call your attention to two lines that we've drawn across this cross-section. The first one is the flood of 1990. On May 3rd of 1990, we experienced the highest flood in terms both of flow and elevation along the creek banks or the levee banks that we have experienced ever since the levees were constructed. That flood was equivalent to what's referred to as the 45-year flood. Now, if you contrast that against the 100-year flood, and you know that we have historically in the city of Dallas protected against the 100-year flood in all of our drainage systems, notice that the 100-year flood is a little bit less than 2 feet above the flood that was experienced in May of 1990. Now then, if you will then look at the graph on the left side of your page, these are what we call flood stage hydrographs. This is time across the bottom, and again, the elevation, and they correspond one to the other. And this very sharp line coming up is what would be expected from a 100-year flow coming down the river at Commerce Street. It would peak rather dramatically, very quickly, to that high at about 416.9, if I'm not mistaken. It would then drop within a matter of days, short days. It might have a subsequent other smaller peak, and then it would begin to drop. Now then, what's significant about the May 3rd, 1990 flood is that contrary to the design flood, it came up, it dropped down a little bit, then it rise rather dramatically, again, within less than 2 feet of the 100-year elevation that would be expected. But then it stayed with us for days and weeks. Okay? So we had water against those levees for days and weeks after the May 3rd storm. The point in me showing you all this is that the levees have performed, and they have performed as expected, at least as it relates to a flood event of a 45-year magnitude, a little bit less than 2 feet below the 100. Next slide, please, Kelly. This next slide is simply the same information, except that I've tried to show it in graphic form. Again, here's the levee, the May 3rd, 1990 peak flow elevation, the 100-year, and then if you would, contrast that against the elevation of the levee, existing elevation of the levee, at that location at Commerce Street. We had 14.3 feet of freeboard.
That is at the top of the levee.
Yes, sir. So had we had the 100-year on that day, we would have had 14 minus 2, 12 feet of freeboard. Next slide. This is an actual picture taken from a helicopter on that date at approximately the time where the river was running at crest. And although it doesn't do justice, it's a little bit difficult. But the point I'm trying to make to you is that you see the water line up against the levee. The distance between where that water line is and the top of the levee is about 14 feet. The elevation of the water here, back up, Kelly, is right there. Man, I'm having trouble with this. It's Alzheimer's setting in.
No, Ramon, back to the picture. I think it's important that we be very clear, Mayor, if I could, be very clear about the amount of space, a distance between the top of the water line and the top of the levee.
The top of the water line to the top of the levee is 14 feet.
That's the highest point of the levee in this picture.
The levee is fairly constant through this area. Through this area, the levee is fairly constant, fairly flat through this area. It does have a gradient, obviously, from beginning to end within that 23-mile stretch. Next slide, please, Kelly. Let's talk a little bit about impacts as a result of this inspection report. And the first one that I want to bring to your attention has to do with Public Law 84-99, which makes agencies like us eligible for federal assistance in the event of a flooding event, both in terms of rehabilitation of the levees should damage occur to those levees, as well as assistance in the fighting of the flood itself. Because of the levees now being found unacceptable, we could lose that protection for the rehabilitation part. The Corps does have a waiver provision for PL 8499, and we have begun the process of applying for that waiver to ensure that we do not lose that federal assistance should we have that kind of event. FEMA accredits levees. Basically what that means, and I'm going to use lay terms, and the FEMA folks can correct me if I'm wrong, but basically the way I describe it is FEMA accepts a certification of a levee and utilizes that to show on their maps the effects of the levee in terms of how they protect folks living adjacent to it. The Corps has indicated that they will notify us of them pulling the certification of the levee, and the Corps has advised us that they will also obviously apprise FEMA of that. Dallas will be required then to provide a letter formally notifying FEMA that the levee system has been decertified, or that that levee certification from the Corps has been withdrawn. We will then send an official letter. We will be required to send an official letter notifying them and identifying the steps forward. FEMA has indicated that they will work with us to determine what steps, how to best coordinate in order to proceed toward reaccreditation, if you will, of those levees. The single most important message in this briefing that I have for you today is found in the following bullet. We recognize that there are deficiencies with our levees. The study, or rather the report, is clear that our levees have deficiencies. However, the Corps has not provided an engineering analysis to demonstrate that these deficiencies would prevent the levees from performing during a 100-year flood. By the way, remember that FEMA standard is the 100-year flood. So, we propose to have a robust and comprehensive analysis done to confirm, to see if we can confirm that our levees have the ability to contain the 100-year flood